Welcome back to Back Road Creeps. Settle in, get comfortable, and let these stories carry you somewhere quiet. Every story here is made for one purpose, to help you drift off and fall asleep. No jump scares, just slow, dark, and cozy storytelling right before bed. If you enjoy what I do here, please like this video and subscribe. It helps more than you know. And drop a comment letting me know where you're from. I love seeing where you all are from. I don't run any ads on this channel. Not a single one. These videos are completely free for you, and I want to keep it that way. If you'd ever like to support me financially, I have a Patreon. The link is pinned in the comments and in the description below. Even the smallest support means everything and keeps this channel alive. Now, get comfortable. Close your eyes if you'd like. Let's walk. Mara found a cabin listing for 3 days in February, and it was $80 total, which should have told us something right there. She's my girlfriend. Is. We're still together, that's not what this is about. She found this listing for a cabin up in northern Manitoba, lake access, ice fishing, the whole thing, and the price was $80 for 3 nights, which in February for a cabin with a generator and running water is basically nothing. She wanted to get her brother out of the city. That's the other part of it. Her brother Danny had just come out of a 30-day program in Winnipeg, and the counselor, or whoever said quiet was good for him. Routine was good, being outside was good. So Mara thought ice fishing. 3 days on a frozen lake. Just the 3 of us. I had met Danny maybe 4 or 5 times before this trip. He's quiet. Not unfriendly, just quiet. He chews the inside of his cheek, which you notice after a while because sometimes there's blood at the corner of his mouth, and he doesn't seem to notice it. He was 31 at the time. I'm telling you this because it matters later, the cheek thing. I think it matters. We drove up from Winnipeg on a Thursday morning and got to the lake around 3 in the afternoon. The snowmobile trail in was about 2 kilometers from the road, and someone had packed it down recently enough that we could get the truck in without too much trouble. The cabin was maybe 20 yards back from the shore. You could see the lake from the porch. Black spruce on every other side. Nothing else. No other cabins, no lights anywhere, just the one snowmobile trail coming in, and that was it. The first night was fine. We drilled holes in the ice the next morning and fished for a few hours and caught some perch, nothing impressive, and came back in and cooked them, and that was the first full day. Danny smoked outside a lot. He'd go out without a coat, just his flannel, and stand on the porch for 10 minutes at a time and come back in. I didn't say anything about it. Mara had told me beforehand not to make a thing about his habits, just let him be. The ice made sounds at night. I want to be clear that I knew this was going to happen. I'd read about it. The way a frozen lake expands and contracts, and the ice cracks and booms. You can feel it in the floor of the cabin when it happens, these low sounds, almost more of a vibration than a sound. That part one was ready for. That part made sense to me. The second night is what I want to tell you about. We'd gone to bed around 10:30. Danny had the pull-out couch in the main room, and Mara and I had the back bedroom. I woke up at some point and could hear Danny moving around, which was normal. He was a light sleeper, and I'd already heard him up a couple times the night before. I could see the light from his phone under the door. I wasn't paying attention to what time it was. I heard the front door open and close, which was him going out for a smoke, and I fell back asleep. Then I heard the door again, open and close, and the lock. He always locked it when he came back in, which I'd noticed. He was careful about that. But this time I heard it differently. The door opened and then it closed fast, and then I heard the lock, the deadbolt, turn. The other times he came back in it was slower. This time it was quick. And then he said something, just a few words, and Mara sat up next to me, so she'd heard it too. We came out into the main room. Danny was standing with his back to the door. His flannel was on, no coat, and his arms were crossed. He said something to us, and Mara said something back, and I could tell from how they were talking that something had happened outside. I asked what was going on, and he said he'd heard something circling the cabin. I want to be careful here, because I don't want to make it sound more dramatic than it was in the moment. My first thought was an animal. Wolf, maybe, or a moose, or something. There are wolves up there. Whatever he'd heard had spooked him, and he'd come inside and locked the door. That's all it was, that's what I was thinking. But then we heard it. It was coming from the north side of the cabin. A sound in the snow, which I can only describe as pressure, weight moving through crusted snow slowly, and it wasn't a footstep sound exactly. It wasn't the crunch you'd expect from hooves or paws. It was more continuous than that, like something large moving slowly, and the snow giving under it with each shift of weight, and the sound moved. It wasn't stationary. It went from the north side of the cabin toward the east side, and we stood there in the middle of the room listening to it go. It kept going. It went around the back of the cabin, which we couldn't see from any window because there were no windows on that side, just the log wall, and then we could hear it coming around on the south side. Mara went to the window on the south wall and moved the curtain a little. The generator was running. There was a light outside on a post near the porch, and it threw a pale yellow light across the near part of the lake. She looked for a few seconds and let the curtain fall back. She shook her head. She hadn't seen anything, but the sound was still going. It went around to the west side, back toward the front, and at some point Danny said something quietly. I didn't catch all of it, but the part one caught was "Don't look too long." I don't know what he meant by that. I didn't ask him. The sound went around the front, and then did something I wasn't expecting, which was it stopped at the porch. It wasn't that the sound stopped entirely, it was that the movement stopped, and then we heard the porch steps, one at a time, slow, and then the porch itself, and the structure of the porch shifted. You could feel it, a small flex in the boards. Not like something had jumped onto it or hit it, like something had put its weight on it slowly. We stood there and nothing else happened for a while. The porch didn't creak again. Nothing hit the door. Danny had his arms crossed still, and he was looking at the floor. Mara was next to me. I reached over and picked up the flashlight that was sitting on the table, and I went to the door, and I unlocked it. Mara said my name. I opened the door. The porch was empty. The light from the post was reaching maybe 15 feet out onto the lake surface, and I shone the flashlight further out. Nothing. I looked down at the porch boards. I looked at the steps. I looked at the snow around the base of the steps and across the near part of the yard between the cabin and the shore. The snow was flat, untouched. The only marks in it were our own tracks from earlier in the day, coming and going from the ice holes, and those were already partly filled in from the wind we'd had in the afternoon. I stood in the doorway for probably 30 seconds looking out. The generator was running on the side of the cabin. You could hear it, a low, steady sound. The lake ice made a boom somewhere out in the dark, just one, the way it does. And then from somewhere further out on the lake, not right there, further out, I heard something. An exhalation. A breath out, slow, through teeth. Not a word, not a call, just a breath. I stepped back in and closed the door and locked it. We didn't go back to sleep that night. We sat in the main room and Danny smoked by the window, cracking it an inch, until he ran out of cigarettes. The sound didn't come back. We didn't hear anything else from the lake. In the morning we loaded the truck. We didn't talk about leaving early, we just started doing it, packing things up, and nobody said let's go. We were on the trail back to the road by 8 in the morning. I've looked things up since then, and I can tell you what I've found, which is not much. There are things that can move across snow without leaving tracks in certain conditions, like when the top layer is hard enough, and the thing is distributed enough in its weight. I looked into whether that applies to anything large enough to make that kind of sound, and I haven't found a clear answer. I looked into whether there's anything in that part of Manitoba that moves in circles, that behavior, circling a structure, and everything I found said predator assessment behavior. Checking for exits, checking for weakness in the structure. Wolves do something like that, but wolves leave tracks. The track thing is the part one can't get past. I stood on that porch and looked at the snow around the steps, and there was nothing there. Our boot prints from earlier in the day, and nothing else. I asked Danny about it a few months later. We were at Mara's family's place for something, and I got him alone for a few minutes, and I asked him what he'd seen when he was out smoking, before he came back inside. He didn't answer right away. He chewed the inside of his cheek. Then he said he hadn't seen anything, which is the same thing I'd seen, nothing, but the way he said it was like the nothing was the problem. He said whatever it was had been close to him when he was standing on the porch, and he hadn't seen it. He said he'd heard it next to him. Not behind him, next to him, close, and there was nothing there. And then he'd gone inside. That's all he said about it. I didn't ask him more. I don't know what I heard on the porch. I don't know what made that sound in the snow going around the cabin. I don't know what I heard out on the ice when I was standing in the doorway with the flashlight. I've been through it a lot of times, and I always end up in the same place, which is I don't know. The tracks thing I can't explain. The sound on the porch I can't explain. The breath from the lake I can't explain. I was wide awake, I was sober, Mara heard it too and Danny heard it too, so it's not that. It's just that I don't have an answer for it. And I've had enough time now that I've mostly accepted that I'm not going to get one. The listing is still up. I checked maybe 6 months ago. Still $80 for 3 nights. Different photos now. Maybe they repainted or something. Still the same lake. Keen was doing wildlife photography work down in Louisiana, or just south of it. I can never remember exactly where the parish line was, and he needed a second person out there for the week, because the cabin was accessible only by flatboat, and you had to have someone who could run the motor if something happened. That was the job. I was between things. I said yes. Keen I had known since maybe 2009 through a mutual friend who did outdoor work. He was quiet in a way that was not unfriendly, just efficient. He did not talk much when he was working, and he worked most of the time. The project was a population survey. Basically, feral hogs were tearing up the wetland habitat, and some conservation group was funding a documentation effort. Keen had done this kind of thing before. I had not done anything like it before, but I could run a flatboat, and I could stay out of the way, which is mostly what he needed. We drove down in his truck, took us most of a day, and the last stretch was on roads that got progressively worse until the road ended at a gravel pull-off next to a channel of dark water that had no name on any map I ever saw. The boat was already there, left by whoever had arranged the rental. We loaded our gear in, and Keen ran the motor, and I sat in the bow and watched the trees close in on both sides. That part of the trip took about 40 minutes. You lost the sense of direction quickly, because the channels turned without any landmarks to track. Keen knew where he was going. He had been out once before to check the place. The cabin was on stilts over flooded timber ground. It had been used for duck hunting at some point, and then not used for a long time. The whole structure had a lean to it, not dramatic, but noticeable, like it had settled unevenly into the water over the years and just stayed that way. Inside there were 2 cots, a propane stove, a folding table, and not much else. The floorboards had gaps between them in places, and you could see the black water underneath if you looked. We did not look much. You got used to the sound of it, water moving under the floor, which it did constantly, because the whole surface of the ground out there was water, just at different depths depending on where you were. The first 2 days were straightforward. We went out in the morning before light. Keen photographed. I kept the boat positioned and stayed quiet. We came back. He worked on his equipment and his notes. We ate. We slept. He saw some hog sign, some actual hogs at a distance the second morning. He got what he needed from those sessions. Nights were loud with insects and the occasional noise from the tree line, but nothing that seemed out of place. I am not someone with a lot of experience in that kind of environment, but Keen was, and he was relaxed, so I was relaxed. The third night was when things changed. And I want to be careful here, because I do not want to say more than I actually know. I have thought about this a lot since then, and I keep coming back to the same problem, which is that I do not have an explanation for what we observed. I am not going to pretend I do. We had both been awake later than usual. Keen was cleaning his lenses, which he did every night, using the hem of his shirt in slow circles. He had been doing it long enough that the fabric had gone gray from the oils and the dust. I was on my cot reading something on my phone, which still had partial signal out there if you held it at a specific angle near the east window. It was around 2 in the morning, maybe a little after. The splashing started outside. I want to explain why it stood out. There was constant water noise underneath the cabin and around it. You heard things moving in the water regularly, birds landing, things I could not identify, and after 2 days you stopped noticing most of it. This was different not because it was louder, but because it had a pattern to it. It was not random. It was moving in a direction. Consistent intervals, consistent direction, and then it curved. That is what made Keen put down the lens he was working on. We both just stopped what we were doing. He went to the window and crouched down and got his camera. He had a telephoto on it already from the morning session, and he did not switch lenses. The moon was out, and there was enough light on the water to see the general shapes of things, the standing dead timber, the surface of the water between them. I came and stood behind him and looked over his shoulder. We could hear the splashing moving around the perimeter of the cabin. Not fast, steady, and then it moved under us, or the sound moved under us, and we could hear it through the floorboards and through the gaps between them. Keen said it was probably hogs, and I thought that was probably right. Hogs will move through water, they are strong enough, and they are active at night. That made sense. Then the sound stopped. Not gradually, just stopped. And a few seconds later, there was a scraping noise against the underside of the floor. Low at first, and then it moved laterally slow. And it was not down at the water level. You have to understand the stilts put the floor a certain distance above the waterline, and whatever was making that sound was up against the actual boards. Not down at stilt level. Up against the boards. Keen said quietly that was too high. That was all he said. He was right. I did not say anything back. We stood there listening, and it scraped again. Same pace, moving from the north side of the cabin toward the middle. I went to a spot near the propane stove where there was a gap between two boards, maybe a finger's width, and I got down on my hands and knees and looked through it. The angle was bad, but I could see a section of the water surface below, and I could see the nearest stilt. There was something pale moving below the cabin. I could not tell you what it was. I could not see a complete shape. What I saw was sections of something, and I want to be precise, sections, not the whole thing, moving through the water and not breaking the surface. It was pale, not white exactly but light, and it was moving slowly in the same direction the scraping was moving above it. Not a fish, not the belly of anything I could identify. The sections were not small, and they were not connected in the way a single animal would be connected. I could not find a single continuous outline. There were just these sections of light-colored something moving in the water below me, and then they were outside my angle of view and gone. I got up. Keen was at the window. He lifted his camera. He had been trying to shoot through the window without the flash, but in the dark at that angle it was not going to work, and I think he knew that, and his finger hit the wrong thing. The flash went off. I was looking over his shoulder when it happened. Half a second of full white light across the whole clearing. That flooded timber lot lit up completely, and then went dark again. What I saw in that half second I have tried to describe several times, and I do not have good words for it. There were eyes, a lot of them, reflected back from the water surface, the way eyes reflect light, that orange-red color when you catch them right. And they were all at the same height, not scattered, not some up high in the trees and some down at the water, all of them at the water level, in a rough semicircle around the cabin. After the flash there was no sound. The splashing did not come back. The scraping did not come back. We stood there for a while. Keen looked at the photo on the back of his camera. The exposure had been wrong, and the image was mostly blown out, overexposed, just white with dark shapes at the edges that could have been trees. You could not make out individual eyes. You could not make anything out. It was not a usable photograph. We did not talk about what we had seen, not that night. Keen went back to his cot. I went back to mine. The water kept moving underneath us the way it always did. I lay there and looked at the ceiling, and after a while it was light outside and we got up. On the boat the next morning, Keen asked me what I had seen through the gap in the floor. I told him. He listened, and then he said he did not know. I asked him what he thought the eyes were. He said he did not know that either. He said he had seen hogs swim before, and they did not move like that, and they did not stay underwater, and they did not travel in groups of that size in his experience. He said he had also never seen reflective eyes at water level like that because animals either have their heads above water or they are under it, not at the surface. That was the whole conversation. We did the morning shoot, came back, packed our gear, and left a day early. Keen said he had what he needed. I did not ask if that was the real reason. I looked at the photo he took probably 50 times over the following weeks. There is nothing in it, just the blown out light and some dark at the edges. If something was out there, the flash did not capture it in any way that is visible. Keen sent me a text maybe 3 months later asking if I had figured it out. I said I had not. He said him neither. That was the last time either of us brought it up. I do not know what was in the water that night. I have gone over the things it could have been, and none of them account for all of it. The scraping against the underside of the boards I cannot explain regardless of what animal it might have been. The sections of pale movement I saw through the floor I cannot identify. The eyes at the water line in that number and at that height I have no accounting for. I have looked up what lives in that kind of water in that part of Louisiana, and I have not found anything that fits. That is all I have. I have been over it, and that is all there is. The old man knew things he shouldn't have known. That's the part one keep coming back to. I'll back up. After my divorce finalized, I needed work, and I wasn't ready to be around people I knew. So I took a contract through the county, cataloging old mining records up in Colorado. Elk River Pass area. A retired geologist named Nolan owned a cabin out there, and the county had an arrangement with him where they stored old survey documents on the property. My job was to go through everything, catalog it, digitize what I could, take 6 weeks. Nolan lived in a trailer up the hill from the cabin. I'd be working in the cabin alone. I drove up in early April. The road into the property was unpaved for the last 4 miles. I'm saying that just so you know how far out it was. What matters is I got there, and Nolan showed me around the cabin, and then went back up to his trailer, and I started work the next morning. The cabin had one main room and a sleeping area, and a loft above that I didn't go into right away. The records were in the main room, stacked in drawers and on shelves, some of them going back to the 1920s. My job was to log each one, photograph it, note the condition. Straightforward work. The kind of work you can do when your brain isn't working right. Nolan came down every morning around 7 with coffee in a thermos. He'd pour some into the lid and hand it to me, and we'd talk a little. He was in his 70s, I'd say, retired from the State Geological Survey. He didn't say much about himself. He asked questions mostly. How the work was going, whether I'd found the logbooks from the 40s, things like that. The questions started changing after the first week. That's when I need you to pay attention. There was a chair at the kitchen table that had one leg shorter than the others. Every time I shifted my weight, the leg scraped the floor. I don't know why that bothered me as much as it did, but it did. And after 3 or 4 days of it, I dragged the chair into the sleeping area and used the other one. I didn't say anything to Nolan about this. It wasn't the kind of thing you mention. 2 mornings later, he came down with the thermos like usual, and we were standing in the main room, and he asked me if I'd slept better after moving the chair. I thought I'd misheard him. I asked him what he said, and he said it again. He asked if I'd slept okay after moving the chair. I didn't say anything for a second. I asked him how he knew about the chair. He rubbed his thumb across his lower lip. He did that a lot, that gesture. Like he was about to say something, and then decided against it. He said he could hear the scraping from his trailer when the wind was right. He said what onward carries if there's nothing between you and it. I let it go. I thought about it later that day, but I let it go in the moment. Another morning, maybe 4 or 5 days after that, he asked me why I'd stopped using the lantern in the loft. He asked it like it was a normal question, like he was asking whether I'd found the 47 logbooks. I told him I hadn't been in the loft at all yet. He looked at me and didn't say anything for a second. Then he said something like, "Oh, he must have been thinking of someone else." He smiled when he said it, but his mouth stayed closed. I want to be careful here, because I don't want to make it sound like more than it was. He was an old man living alone on a property in the mountains. He could have been confused. He could have been thinking of someone who'd stayed in the cabin before me. The county had used it for storage a long time. Other people had probably worked out there. That's what I told myself. That evening it rained hard. I mean the kind of rain that makes the roof loud. I sat at the table working through a stack of 1930s survey maps, and I kept thinking about what he'd said. About the lantern. The stairs to the loft were just boards nailed into the wall at an angle in the corner. I'd looked up at the opening a few times, but I hadn't gone up. I went up that night. The loft was low-ceilinged and ran the length of the main room. There were wooden boxes up there, a few cardboard ones that had softened with moisture. There was a window at one end, small, with rain running down it. There was dust on everything, and when I moved the flashlight around, the dust moved in the air. In the corner near the window there was a lantern. One of those old oil lanterns, glass chimney, metal base. I went over to it. I put my hand near the glass without touching it. It was warm, not hot, not like it had been on recently, but warm the way glass gets when something has been burning in it within the last few hours. The loft was cold. The window had a gap at the bottom where air came through, and everything up there was cold except the lantern. I went back downstairs. I sat at the table for a while. I didn't go to sleep until late. The next morning Nolan came down, and I asked him straight out whether he had a key to the cabin. He said he did. He said it was his cabin. I asked if he'd been inside recently, maybe while I was out. I drove into town every few days for groceries and to use the Wi-Fi. He said he hadn't been inside since I arrived. He said it, and then did that thing with his thumb across his lip. I went into town that afternoon anyway. When I came back, I went up to the loft and looked at the lantern. It was cold. The oil in it was down maybe a quarter of the way. I hadn't checked the level before, so I don't know what that means. I don't know if I would have noticed. What I did after that was I started paying attention to things differently. Not because I had a plan. I just started noticing the state of things when I left a room and checking when I came back. The position of papers on the table. Which drawers were open or closed. Whether the chair was where I'd left it. I kept a notebook for the cataloging, and I started writing other things in the margins. Chair facing east, papers stacked, top drawer closed. That kind of thing. I wanted to know if things moved when I wasn't there. Some things moved. Not dramatically. Not in a way I can describe and have it sound like much. A stack of survey maps was in a different order on 2 separate occasions. I know how that sounds. Papers shift, they slide. But I had photographed the stack, and the top map on the second occasion was not the same one I'd photographed, and it was a map from the 1950s that didn't fit in the sequence I'd been working through. One morning I came down from the sleeping area, and the short-legged chair was back at the kitchen table. I had not moved it back. I was certain of that. I didn't say anything to Nolan about any of this. He kept coming down with coffee. He kept asking questions. They were mostly normal. But every few days there'd be one that didn't fit. He asked once if I was using the south-facing drawer for the loose maps, or whether I'd found another way to keep them flat. I hadn't mentioned any drawer to him. The south-facing drawer was a wide, shallow one below the main shelf, and I had been using it for maps that couldn't be rolled, laying them flat inside it. I asked him how he knew about it. He said he'd worked out of that cabin for years, and knew where everything was. He said he just assumed I'd found the drawer by now. That could be true. That's the thing. Every single one of those explanations could be true. A drawer that's been in a room for decades, of course he knows about it. Sound carrying from the cabin to the trailer when the wind is right, maybe. The lantern being warm from the sun through the window, except the window faced north, and I've thought about that part specifically, and I still don't know. After the chair moved back, I drove into town and sat in a parking lot and looked up the property on my phone. County records. I found the parcel listing, Nolan's name on it, bought in '84. I don't know what I was looking for. I went back because I'd signed a contract and I needed the money, and I didn't have anywhere else to be. I stayed the full 6 weeks. I finished the cataloging. In the last week I got into a routine of checking the loft every evening before I went to sleep. I'd go up the board stairs and put my hand near the glass and check and come back down. The lantern was cold every time except once. 3 days before I left, it was warm again. Same warmth as before. Not hot, just not cold. I didn't go looking for a reason. I just stood there with my hand near the glass, and then I went back downstairs. Nolan helped me carry the last of the boxes out to my car on the final day. He shook my hand and said to let the county office know if I had questions about any of the records. He said it had been nice having someone around. I drove out those 4 miles of unpaved road, and then the paved county road toward the highway. I filed the catalog with the county 2 weeks later. Someone emailed me to say the work looked thorough, and they'd pass my name along for similar contracts. I've thought about it a lot since then. The lantern mostly. There are probably explanations. Old cabins hold heat in ways I don't understand, and metal and glass do things I can't account for. I've thought about whether someone else was using the cabin at night, and what that would mean in terms of how they were getting in. I've thought about whether Nolan was lying. I've thought about whether any single piece of it is actually strange, or whether I was just in a strange place in my life and looking for things to notice. I don't know what it adds up to. I just know the order things happened in. He knew about the loft before I'd gone up there. The lantern was warm twice. The chair moved back. That's all I've got. My brother built a cabin. I want to start there because that part matters. He built it himself over 3 summers in a clearing about 40 minutes off a logging road in northern Vermont. 1 room downstairs, a loft above it, no grid hookup, no neighbors within reasonable distance. He was proud of it. He took pictures of the frame going up and sent them to the whole family, and nobody really knew what to say back. So we all said things like, "Wow," and "That's incredible," and he seemed satisfied with that. I had been in the hospital. I don't need to go into the whole thing. It was a hospitalization. It lasted about 3 weeks. And when I came out, my brother called and said he thought the cabin would be good for me. He said the quiet would help. He said he'd stay the first weekend, and then I could have it as long as I needed. He said all of this in a way that made it clear the decision had already been made, and he was just telling me about it, which is how my brother does most things. And I said okay. So we went up in early January. He drove. It took most of a day. The last 40 minutes were slow because of the road condition, and because there were points where I wasn't sure we were still on a road at all, but we got there. The cabin was smaller than the pictures made it look. Everything my brother builds is smaller than the pictures make it look, because he always photographs it from the ground looking up, which adds scale that isn't there. Inside it smelled like smoke and pine, and something underneath that I couldn't name then, and still can't. 2 windows facing the clearing. A wood stove in the corner. A table with 2 chairs. The stairs to the loft were more like a ladder with wider rungs. He'd built those himself too. He kept asking about my medication. Not every hour or anything like that, but once in the morning and once at night he'd find a way to bring it up. He'd ask if I'd eaten enough first, if I was taking them with food the way the instructions said. The voice he used was the same voice he uses when he's trying not to make something into a thing, which is a voice I've known since we were kids. I said yes each time because the answer was yes. I was taking them. I was eating. I was fine. He left Sunday afternoon. He had work, which was true. He's not someone who invents reasons. He showed me where everything was again, even though he'd already shown me on Saturday. He wrote the neighbor's name and number on a piece of paper and put it on the table. The neighbor was a woman named Greta who lived about 2 miles out by a different road, and he said she checked in on the cabin sometimes and knew the area, and that I should call her if anything came up. He said the cell signal was bad, but not zero. He said he'd call when he could. Then he drove out, and I stood in the clearing and watched the truck until the trees took it. For the first few days, I didn't notice anything. I read. I slept a lot, which the doctor had said to expect. I figured out the wood stove well enough to keep the place from getting too cold overnight. I walked the perimeter of the clearing in the mornings because I thought I should be moving, and the birch trees were very white against everything else. And I walked and came back and made coffee, and that was the days. The noticing started around day 4 or 5. I'm not sure exactly because I wasn't keeping track. What I noticed was the stove. I was reaching for my mug, which I'd put on the table when I got up to check something on the stove, and when I turned back the mug seemed farther than it should have been. Not far, just not where my hand expected. I picked it up and didn't think too much about it. I thought I was tired. I thought my spatial sense was off from sleeping so much. But then it happened again 2 nights later, and I started paying attention differently. The table wasn't in a different place. I'd look at it, and it looked right. The stove looked right. Everything looked like it was where it had been. It was only when I moved between things that something felt off. The distances between objects. The number of steps. I should explain the steps thing. I started counting them because I couldn't find another way to test what I was noticing. I'm not someone who usually does that kind of thing. It wasn't something I planned. I just found myself counting one morning because it seemed like the only way to get an actual number instead of a feeling. Sink to the stairs, 5 steps. I counted it in the morning and counted it again at noon and got 5 both times. Then I counted it just after midnight and got 7. I stood there and counted again. 7. I went back to the sink and counted again from the start. 7. I tried to think about whether I was stepping differently at night. Shorter steps, longer steps. I tried to step the same way I stepped in the morning, heel to toe, measured, and I got 7. I did this for 3 nights. Same result each time. 5 during the day. 7 after midnight. The thing I kept coming back to was that I never saw anything change. I would sit at the table and look at the stove, and it looked like the same distance. I would get up and walk to it and count 7 steps. I don't know how to explain that. I'm not trying to explain it right now. I'm just telling you what the numbers were. Other things. The ceiling beams. There were 4 of them running the width of the cabin, and my brother had used long nails to hang things from them. A lantern, a coil of rope, and the nail holes were still there for the nails that had been moved. During the day, the nails lined up with particular points on the beams. At night, they didn't line up the same way. I noticed this because I was already looking for things to notice, so maybe I would have missed it otherwise. But once I saw it, I couldn't stop seeing it. The mug thing happened several more times. I'd set something down and turn around, and it would be slightly farther from where I'd set it. Not dramatically. Not across the room. An inch or 2. Maybe 3. Enough that my hand went to where I remembered putting it, and came back empty, and I'd have to look. I called my brother around the middle of the 2nd week. The signal was bad and the call cut out twice, but I got him. He asked how I was doing, and I said fine, and I told him about the steps, and I told him about the beams. There was a pause, and then he asked if I was sleeping okay. I said I was sleeping more than usual. He asked if I was taking the medication with food. I said I was. He said he thought what I was describing might be a side effect, that sometimes the medication affected spatial perception, that I should write it down and bring it up with the doctor at the follow-up. I said okay. I wrote it down. I looked up the side effects on my phone when the signal was good enough. Spatial perception wasn't listed. That doesn't mean it isn't one. I know that. I'm not saying the medication wasn't involved. I don't know what the medication was or wasn't doing. I'm just saying it wasn't on the list. The snow started around the end of the 2nd week. Heavy, the kind that sticks immediately to everything. It came in the night, and by morning the clearing was covered, and I couldn't see my footprints from the morning walks anymore. I kept walking, but I stayed closer to the cabin because the tree line looked different under the snow, and I didn't trust my sense of where things were. That night I went to bed earlier than usual. I don't know what time it was when I woke up, but it was still full dark and the snow was still coming because I could hear it on the roof, that soft particular weight of it. I needed water. I'd left a glass on the table. I came down from the loft. I knew the stairs well enough by then that I didn't need a light for the first part, just my hand on the wall to the left of the ladder, and I came down and stepped off onto the floor and turned toward the table. I walked into the staircase. Not the staircase I'd just come down. I mean the lower newel post, the corner of it, caught my shin, and I went down on one knee and hit the floor and stayed there. The staircase was not where it was during the day. I knew where it was. I had come down it 10 seconds before. I was holding the floor with both hands, trying to understand where in the room I was. I stayed there for a while. I don't know how long. The floor was cold. The snow kept coming on the roof. I was trying to work out the geometry. If I'd come off the last step going the direction I'd been going, and then turned toward where the table should be, the staircase should have been behind me by at least 6 feet. It was right there. I'd walked into it going away from it. I was crouched on the floor trying to work that out when I heard the footsteps. They were above me, in the loft, directly above where I was on the floor. They were slow and they were careful, and they were the steps of someone who had just found the room larger than they expected and was figuring out where things were. That's the only way I know how to describe it. Not panicked, not sneaking, just moving slowly through a space that had just changed size. I stayed on the floor. The footsteps crossed the loft and stopped. I heard nothing after that except the snow. I did not go back up to the loft that night. I stayed where I was until it got light, and then I went up, and there was nothing there. The blankets were the way I'd left them. My book was where I'd left it. The window above the bed had snow on the outside of it, and nothing on the inside. I packed my things that morning and drove out. The logging road was bad with the snow, and I had to go very slowly for a long time before I hit a plowed surface. I called my brother when I had signal, and told him I was coming back. He asked if I was okay. I said I wasn't sure. He said I could come stay with him, and I said that was fine. I've been back for about 6 weeks now. The follow-up with the doctor went the way follow-ups go. I told her what I told my brother about the steps and the distances, and she asked the same questions he asked about sleep and medication and food. She said it was worth watching. She didn't change anything. My brother doesn't bring up the cabin. I don't either. The thing I keep coming back to, and I don't have anywhere to put this, is that the footsteps I heard weren't frightened. That's the wrong word. I said I wouldn't say what things felt like. What I mean is they didn't sound like someone reacting to something. They sounded like someone doing what I'd been doing for 2 weeks, which was moving carefully through a space to figure out where things had gone. I don't know what that means. I don't know if it means anything. I'm just saying that's what they sounded like. My husband inherited a cabin from his uncle, and none of us had ever met the uncle. That's the part one keep coming back to. His name was Dale, and he died in October, and we found out about the cabin from a lawyer, not from anyone in the family. My husband's mother, when he called to tell her, just said oh, and then changed the subject. He asked her about it again later, and she said Dale always did what Dale wanted, and that was the end of that conversation. So we didn't know anything about it going in. That's what I want you to understand before I get into the rest of this. We were not people who go into things without information. My husband researches things. He reads the manual. He looked up the property and found basically nothing, just the acreage and a tax record and a photo from a county survey that showed a roof and some trees. He called the lawyer again, and the lawyer said the cabin was used for trapping, probably not recently, and that we should factor cleanup into our timeline before listing the land. He said the word timeline like it was a normal situation. We thought it was a normal situation. We drove up on a Friday. It was about 4.5 hours, and my husband drove the whole way, and I handled the navigation on my phone because the GPS kept rerouting us onto roads that got smaller and smaller. The last stretch wasn't really a road at all anymore. It was 2 ruts through dead leaves with trees close on both sides, and my husband had to slow down to walking speed, and even then the branches were scraping the side of the truck. We got there just after 5, and the light was already going. The cabin was 1 room, and a small room off the back that might have been meant as a pantry. There was a wood stove, a cot with no mattress, a table bolted to the wall, and along one whole side there were shelves with trapping equipment on them. traps of different sizes, wire, a few cans whose labels had gone soft and illegible. It smelled like something had died in the walls at some point, and also like grease of some kind, machine grease maybe, and like mouse droppings. There was no power and no running water. There was a hand pump outside near what looked like a fire pit and a burn pile area behind the cabin, just a clear space in the trees with a ring of old ash. My husband is someone who needs to be doing something. That's just how he is. He doesn't stand around and look at things. So within maybe 20 minutes of us getting there, he had started moving things outside. I set up the camping lanterns and started going through the shelves and logging what was there in case any of it had value, which it didn't mostly, but it gave me something to do. He hummed when he worked. He always hummed when he was working. It was 3 notes, the same 3 notes in a loop, and I couldn't have told you what song it was from or if it was from anything. He'd been doing it for the 12 years I'd known him, and I'd stopped hearing it a long time ago. He worked until it was full dark, and then we ate what we'd brought and used the hand pump to do dishes, and went to bed on the sleeping bags we'd laid on the cot and the floor. I took the cot because my back. We heard it that first night, but I didn't register it as anything except some animal. It was thin, is the best word I have for it. A thin sound, coming from beyond the trees on the north side of the cabin. I heard it and thought fox, or maybe something caught in something, and then I was asleep. The next day my husband spent the whole morning on the trapping equipment, deciding what to throw and what to pile separately, and I found a wooden box under the table that had papers in it. Receipts for the most part, handwritten, and a few photographs that were too dark to make out, and a notebook that turned out to be a log of catches and dates going back a long way. The last entry was 11 years before we were there. I kept the notebook to show my husband, and put the rest back. By afternoon he'd filled most of the burn pile area with things from inside. He was going to burn it the next morning, when we could watch it properly. He was in a good mood. He kept saying things like, well, this isn't so bad and we'll be out of here by Tuesday. And I agreed with him, because it did seem like it wasn't so bad, and we probably would be out by Tuesday. That evening we heard the crying. I want to say crying, because that's the word that came to me. It wasn't a scream, and it wasn't a howl. It was a sustained, rhythmic sound at a pitch that made you think of something that had been at it for a long time. Not frightened, more like something that had gone past frightened into just making the sound, because it was still making the sound. My husband said fox right away. We'd heard foxes before. They make sounds people don't expect from foxes. I said probably, and we listened for a little while. It kept going. Same rhythm, same pitch. No variation. No movement through the brush, no crackling, nothing. Just the sound from the same spot on the other side of the tree line. We went to bed before it stopped. I don't know when it stopped because I was asleep. The next morning my husband went out to check on the burn pile, and he came back inside, and he said, come look at this. There were tracks around the pile, in the ash at the edge, and in the soft ground near the trees. They looked like dog tracks. He knows what dog tracks look like. He hunted with his father. He kept looking at them, and then he pointed out the stride. Normally with a dog, or any 4-footed animal, there's an offset. The back foot doesn't land exactly where the front foot was, but these were too even. Every set of prints was almost exactly matched, front and back overlapping, like whatever made them was placing each foot with more care than an animal in normal movement would. He didn't say anything about that for a while. He just kept walking the perimeter of the pile and looking down. We burned the pile that morning, and it went fine. We worked the rest of the day. By late afternoon the inside of the cabin was mostly cleared out, and my husband started talking about whether we needed the whole day Tuesday, or whether we could realistically get out Monday evening. He was in a good mood again. I was too, mostly. The crying came back that night. It was closer. That's the only way I can put it. Not close, but closer than it had been. Still from the north side, but not from as far back in the trees. My husband and I were sitting at the table with the lantern, and we both heard it at the same time, and we both looked at the wall in that direction, which is what you do, you look toward the sound even when there's nothing to see. He said it again, and I said probably, but neither of us moved for a while. Then he stood up. He didn't say anything, he just stood up from the table, and I could see him deciding something. He got the flashlight off the shelf. A big one, we'd brought it for the outhouse at night. He was going to the door, and I said his name, and he said, I'm just going to look. That's the only thing either of us said. He went outside, and I sat at the table. I could see the beam through the window, the way it moved between the trees. He was standing at the tree line, not going in, just shining the light. The crying stopped immediately when he opened the door. Just cut off. I watched the flashlight beam move back and forth a few times, and then it went still. Then from much farther back in the trees, and I'm talking much farther, not near the tree line at all, something made his sound. The 3-note hum. Not a sound like it. His pattern. The same 3 notes in the same order at the same spacing he used when he was working, which I had not consciously registered as a distinct sound in over a decade, but which I knew immediately, and without any doubt was his. His exact pattern. He came back inside right after. He put the flashlight on the shelf and sat back down. I looked at him, and he looked at me, and then he looked at the table. He said that was probably nothing. I said yeah. He said sound does things in the woods, it bounces off things. I said yeah. Neither of us had anything else to say about it, so we didn't say anything. We went to bed, and I lay there and listened, and there was nothing else that night. In the morning he went outside first thing, and I watched him from the window while I heated water for coffee. He stood for a while on the north side of the cabin facing the trees, just standing there looking. Then he went to look at the ground near the tree line. He stood over a spot for a long time. When he came in I asked him what he saw, and he said nothing, just soft ground. He didn't say what was in the soft ground, and I didn't ask. We finished the cabin that day. We loaded what we were keeping into the truck, which wasn't much, just the log book and one of the traps that was old enough my husband thought someone might want it. We locked the cabin and left the key in the lockbox for the realtor. We drove out the same way we'd come in, the 2 ruts through the leaves, branches on the sides of the truck. The road was the same. Everything was the same. My husband drove, and I handled the navigation, and we didn't talk much for the first hour. He had the radio on low. At some point he started humming, and then he stopped. He didn't start again. We sold the land in the spring. Whoever bought it said they were going to log part of it and put in a proper road. I don't know if they did. I didn't ask, and the realtor didn't tell us. I looked up the uncle once, after we got home. Dale. I found an obituary that said he was a lifelong outdoorsman, and that he was survived by a sister, which would be my husband's mother, and it listed no other family. It said he had lived on his property for many years. Not in town. On his property. The obituary was 4 sentences long, and the funeral had already happened by the time we found it. My husband never mentioned the sound again. We've talked around it a few times without talking about it. I don't know what he thinks it was. I haven't asked. There's a version of this where the sound carries farther than you think, and there was something out there, some animal, and it made a sound that happened to fall into a pattern I recognized because I wanted to recognize something. That version makes sense to me some of the time. The part that doesn't fit in that version is how long it took him to stop humming in the truck, and the fact that when he did stop he kept his eyes on the road and put both hands on the wheel. And we didn't stop for gas until we were back on the highway and the trees were behind us. I don't know what was in the soft ground by the tree line. I should have asked him. I didn't, and I'm not going to now. I worked a forestry contract up near Blackwater Ridge in 2009, which is in Oregon, and I need you to know that first because the rest of it doesn't make sense without knowing what kind of place that was. It's not like a town nearby. The nearest anything was 40 minutes of bad road. We were out there to do a specific job, and the company put us up in this old hunting cabin, and that was the arrangement. There were 3 of us. Me, a guy named Dean who I had worked one previous job with maybe 2 years before that, and a guy named Alvarez who neither of us knew. Dean I sort of trusted, because I had at least seen how he worked. Alvarez I didn't know. He was quiet in a way that wasn't relaxed, more like he was waiting for something. That's not me saying something was wrong with him. I didn't think that then. I'm just telling you what he was like. The cabin had 2 bedrooms. Dean and Alvarez each took one, and I took the couch in the main room, because I was the last one there, and that was what was left. I didn't care. I've slept on worse. There was a diesel heater that worked most of the time, and running water that worked some of the time, and that was enough for a 6-week contract. The first week was nothing. We worked the same section, drove back together, ate separately pretty much, went to sleep. Normal. Dean snored loud enough that you heard it through the wall, and Alvarez had this habit of clipping his toenails over the hearth and leaving them there, which I thought about saying something about, and then didn't. That was the worst of it that first week. Standard stuff. People are annoying when you live with them in a small space. The food thing started around day 10 or 11. I had bought specific things with my own money that I kept on a particular shelf. Not a lot, just stuff I wanted that wasn't the company provisions. Some crackers. 2 cans of soup I liked. A jar of peanut butter. I'm not a person who cares a lot about food, but I do notice when things move or change. One of the cans was gone. I thought I'd maybe eaten it and forgotten. I do that, so I let it go. Then the bread. We had a company loaf, and I'd had maybe 4 slices over 2 days, and I go to use it again, and there's almost nothing left. I asked Dean if he went through it. He says Alvarez probably did. I ask Alvarez, and he says he hasn't touched it. That goes nowhere. People lie about dumb things. I didn't push it. What I couldn't explain was the prints. One morning I came into the kitchen before the other 2 were up, and there were prints near the sink. On the floor. I stood there and looked at them for a while. They were from a boot or a shoe, something with a defined sole, and they were damp like someone had come in from outside not long before. But they were small. Smaller than mine, smaller than Dean's, and Dean had small feet to begin with. I didn't get a tape measure out. I just stood there and looked at them, and then Dean came in, and I showed him, and he looked and said Alvarez must have different boots. That was the end of that conversation. I want to be clear that at this point I was not worried exactly. I was paying attention. There's a difference. The contract was 6 weeks, and I needed the money, and I wasn't going to make anything into a problem that might not be a problem. Then the sound started. I was on the couch, which put me in the main room, which was between the front door and the 2 bedrooms. So I heard things that the other 2 probably didn't. Around midnight, sometimes later, I would hear something. Not outside. Inside. It was murmuring, which is the only word I have for it. Very low. The kind of sound where you can hear that someone is talking, but you can't hear what they're saying. The first time I heard it, I thought it was Dean talking in his sleep. He made a lot of noise generally. I put my face into the couch cushion and went back to sleep. Second time it happened, maybe 2 nights later, I lay there and listened, and it wasn't coming from the bedrooms. Or not just from there. It was closer, and it stopped. Very suddenly, like someone had put a hand over a mouth. Or like whoever was talking heard something and stopped. I lay there for a while, and then I didn't hear anything else, and I went back to sleep. I kept telling myself there were explanations. Old cabin, weird acoustics, pipes. I did not actually believe the pipes explanation, but I used it to get back to sleep. The 3rd time, or maybe the 4th, I decided to do something about it. I stayed awake. This was deliberate. I lay on the couch with my jacket over my face like I was sleeping, and I just waited. It took a while. I was tired from the work, and staying awake was an effort. But I did it. I lay there for what felt like 2 hours, and then I heard the front door. It's a latch door, old style, and if you go slow with it, you can open it without it making a lot of noise. Someone was going slow with it. I heard it ease open, and then the cold came in because it was below freezing outside by that point most nights. Dean's voice said something very quiet, and I caught the words, "Keep your light down." Then I heard feet. Multiple sets of feet. Wet shoes on the floor. 2 people at least, maybe 3, and their breathing was the kind of breathing you have when you've been out in the cold for a while, and you come inside, and your body is still working to warm up. Nobody turned a light on in the main room. Nobody came into the main room. I stayed still and kept the jacket over my face and breathed slow. After maybe 2 minutes, I heard them go into the back. Dean's room was at the back. I sat up. I sat there on the couch in the dark, and I looked at the room. The door to outside was closed again. The heater was going. Everything looked like it always looked, except that there was something different in the air, and I'm not going to try to explain that further than saying there were 2 smells that weren't usually there. Cigarettes, and something else underneath that I don't have a good word for. Something like metal or like pennies. That's the closest I can get. I stood up. The rifle rack near the door had 3 slots, and Dean's spot was empty. His .30-06 that he kept there every night was not there. I stood looking at that for longer than I should have. Then Alvarez's voice came out of the dark from somewhere to my left in the kitchen area, very low, and he said, "That's not Dean." I need to be careful about this part, because I want to say it the way it happened and not add anything to it. I did not move right away. I stood where I was. Alvarez was in the kitchen, in the dark, and I had not heard him come out of his room, which meant he had either been up before all of this happened, or he had come out at some point while I was watching the door, and I had not noticed him. His room was off the kitchen, which was off the main room, and there was a way to go between them that didn't pass me. I understood that. I just hadn't thought about it. I turned, and I could see him against the window because there was some light coming through from outside, enough to see a shape. He was standing still. He was looking at the hallway that led to Dean's room. I said his name. Quietly. I said it once. He held a finger up in my direction. Like wait. We stood there. From the back of the cabin came sounds I couldn't make out. Movement. Not voices now. Just movement. Alvarez moved toward me and got close, and he said something and I could only catch part of it because he was barely making sound at all. I caught the words for 3 nights, and I caught either they take or they gave. I couldn't tell which, and I caught a number that was either 4 or 14, and I don't know what it referred to. Then he stopped talking and we both stood there, and I don't know what he was waiting for exactly. What I did was I went to the door. I put on my boots, which were right there, and I put on my jacket, and I opened the door and I went outside. It was very cold. Clear. I walked to the truck, which was mine, not a company vehicle, and I got in and I locked it. I sat in the truck for I don't know how long. No lights on. I could see the cabin and the windows. The window of Dean's room did not have a curtain, and after a while I saw movement in it, or I thought I did. A shape or shapes. I couldn't tell. Nothing came to the truck. At some point it started getting light, and I got out of the truck and went back inside. Alvarez was on the couch asleep, or pretending to be. Dean was in his room with the door closed, and when I knocked he answered in Dean's voice. And when I said I needed to talk to him, he came out and stood in the doorway looking tired and not particularly concerned. I asked him who he'd had in here last night. He said nobody. I told him I was awake. I told him I heard them come in. He said I must have been dreaming, and then he went to the bathroom and closed the door. I did not find a way to push it further that felt like it would go anywhere. I looked at the rifle rack, and his .30-06 was back. We worked that day same as every other day. All 3 of us. Everything was normal from the outside. Dean talked about something he'd seen on television before we left. Alvarez was quiet like he always was. That night I pushed the couch against the front door. I heard Alvarez get up at some point in the night and come toward the main room and then stop. I heard him standing there for a minute, and then I heard him go back to his room. Nobody tried the door. I finished the contract. I needed the money and I finished it. That's 4 more weeks I'm not going to be able to give you a full account of, because I made myself not pay attention to everything. I know the food kept disappearing. I know I heard sounds twice more that I couldn't explain. I know that one morning in the last week there was a sleeping bag I didn't recognize pushed under the shelf on the back porch. And I know when I went to look at it again that afternoon it wasn't there. I never got a straight answer from Dean. The contract ended and we drove out separately because I left a day early and told the company I had something I needed to handle. I haven't talked to Dean since. I don't know Alvarez's first name or where he's from. I have no way to follow up on any of it, even if I thought following up would tell me something. I don't know who those people were that he was bringing in. I don't know what the arrangement was, or where they came from, or why the rifle kept moving. I've thought about it, and I have some ideas, but none of them account for all of it, and I'm not going to tell you my ideas because I don't want to say something I can't back up. I just know that when Alvarez said that's not Dean, he was not asking a question. He knew something about what was happening in there, and whatever he knew was enough that we both ended up standing in that room in the dark not moving, and neither of us went down that hallway. I don't have anything else to tell you about it. I had already driven something like 19 hours by the time I stopped. That's not me exaggerating. I checked my phone when I pulled off the highway, and it said 19 hours over 2 days. And I remember thinking that was too many hours for someone my age, which is 53, and that I should probably sleep before I drove another 4 hours home. My daughter goes to school in Harrisonburg. James Madison. She's a sophomore. I drove out from Albuquerque to see her because she had a recital. She plays cello, and I hadn't seen her since Christmas. The plan was I'd drive out, spend 2 days with her, then drive back. Except I didn't want to start the drive back without sleeping first. So I pulled up this app one used sometimes for rentals and found a cabin about 40 minutes from her campus. Outside a town called Luray. I'd never been there. The pictures looked fine. The listing said 1 bedroom, fireplace, mountain view, and the price was around $80 a night, which seemed low, but I didn't think too hard about that. I booked it for 1 night. Just 1 night. I want you to understand that part because it matters to how I was thinking when I got there. I wasn't planning to dig in. I was planning to sleep and leave. So I get there. The code on the lockbox works. The door opens. I step inside. And there's food in the fridge. I noticed it because I opened the fridge looking for water, and instead I found half a container of mustard and some takeout box and a couple of beers. One of the beers had cigarette ash floating in it. I looked at that for a second and then just thought, okay, the cleaner left stuff behind. It happens. I'll deal with it tomorrow. That was my logic. Not great logic, but it was late and I was tired and I had already decided things were fine. The bathroom mirror had steam on it. I noticed that after. I went to wash my face and the mirror was streaked, like the room had been warm and wet not that long before I got there. I wiped it with my sleeve. Then I went and sat on the edge of the bed for a minute. I called the owner. The number was in my confirmation email. I called twice and it went straight to voicemail both times. Not even a ring. Just clicked over. I left a message the second time, something like, "Hey, I'm here at the cabin, just checking in, give me a call." I kept my voice normal because I still hadn't decided there was a problem. I was still in the mode where I was explaining things away. The sun went down fast. That part surprised me. I was watching it through the kitchen window, and then it was just gone behind the ridge, and the whole property got dark at once. The signal inside the cabin was bad. You had to stand by the kitchen window with your arm raised to get 1 bar, sometimes 2. I figured that out by walking around holding my phone up until something registered. I was trying to decide whether to just drive to a motel. There were probably motels in Luray. The thing is, I was tired enough that driving felt like a bad idea, and I had already paid for the cabin, and I'm the kind of person who doesn't like to waste money. In this situation, that was probably not the right instinct to follow, but it was the one I had. Then I heard tires on gravel. The driveway came off a dirt road, and you could hear it when a car came up it. I heard the crunch of it, and then I saw headlights moving past the window, except the headlights went off before the car reached the cabin. I didn't see the vehicle clearly, just the shape of it in the dark, a pickup truck moving slow. It went past the front of the cabin, and I couldn't see it anymore. I waited. I was standing by the kitchen window with my arm up trying to get signal, and I just stayed there. Then I heard the gravel again. Slower that time. The truck went past again without headlights. I could see it a little better, dark colored. I couldn't tell you the make. It went past and came around again, and the third time it stopped. I heard the driver's side door open, then close. Nobody knocked. Nobody came to the front door. There was just the door opening, the door closing, and then nothing. I went and locked the front door. I already had my phone in my hand, and I managed to get 1 bar, and I texted the owner. I said something like, "Someone may still be staying here." I kept it short because I didn't know if it would go through. The 3 dots came up immediately. The owner was already looking at the phone. The dots were there for maybe 15 seconds, and then they stopped. No message came through. I stood there with my arm up, and the phone going in and out of signal. Then about a minute later a message came through. It said, "Do not let them know you're inside." All caps. That's how it came. I read it twice. I was reading it the second time when I heard the back door handle move. It moved once. Slowly. Not like someone testing whether it was locked. More like someone who expected it to open. Like they'd been through that door before, and they knew how the handle sat, and they were just doing what they normally did. It stopped when it didn't open. I hadn't locked the back door. I want to say I had, but I hadn't. What stopped it was the small latch bolt above the handle, the secondary one, which was already thrown when I arrived. So the handle turned, and the door held, and nothing else happened. I moved to the middle of the front room. I didn't turn any lights off because I was afraid the click of the switch would tell whoever was outside that someone was in there. That's the specific thing I was thinking about. The sound of a switch. I don't know how long I stood there. My phone said 10 minutes, but that doesn't sound right. It felt like either 2 minutes or an hour. I didn't hear footsteps outside. I didn't hear the truck again. I didn't hear anything at all from outside. At some point I tried to call the police. I dialed, and it wouldn't connect. I tried twice. The second time it connected for about 2 seconds, and then dropped. So I typed out a text to my daughter. I put in the address, which I had to find in my confirmation email, and I said I was having an issue at this cabin. I pressed send and watched it sit in the outbox for about 3 minutes before it went through. She called me back in maybe 4 minutes, which is fast for her. The call kept breaking up. I could hear her asking what was happening, and I kept saying I'm fine, which I don't know why I said because it wasn't what I meant to say at all. The call dropped before I could finish. She texted me after. She said she'd called the county sheriff's office. She said they told her they'd send someone out. I went and stood by the front window where I could see part of the driveway. The truck was still there. I could see the back corner of it. It had not moved. Here's what I decided to do. I decided to get to my car. My car was parked at the front, maybe 30 feet from the door. I had my keys. If I could get to the car, I could lock it and drive out. The truck was parked sideways to the driveway, but there was room around it on the grass side. I stood at the front door for a while before I opened it. I don't know what I was waiting for. I opened the door and walked to my car and got in and locked it. I'm trying to remember if I saw anyone outside. I don't think I did. I had my head down and I was moving fast, and I got in and locked the doors and looked up, and I didn't see anyone standing anywhere. But the passenger side window of the truck was down. I don't know when it had been rolled down. I didn't notice it on any of the passes the truck made. The window was down on the passenger side, which meant someone had been in the passenger seat at some point, or the driver had rolled it down from inside, and I don't know which because I only ever heard one door. I drove over the grass around the front of the truck and got back to the dirt road and drove until I found the highway. About 15 minutes south there was a gas station, and I pulled in and sat in the parking lot. I tried the owner again. Voicemail. I sent another text. I said I'd left. I was at a gas station on Route 340. I wanted a refund. They never responded to that. The account got deactivated sometime in the next few days. I reported it through the app. They refunded me and sent a form email about safety policies. I found a Holiday Inn about 20 minutes south and checked in there. Slept and drove home the next morning. The whole drive I kept coming back to the message. The all caps one. Not exactly what it said. More the timing. The 3 dots were there before I'd even put my arm down. The owner had been looking at their phone. They already knew something was wrong before I texted them, or they found out very fast. And then they sent that one message and went silent. No follow-up. No, are you okay? No explanation of who was out there or why, or what I was supposed to do next. I've thought about the explanations. The one I come back to most is that the cabin was being used by somebody the owner had some kind of arrangement with. And when I texted, they panicked. And the message was them trying to not make things worse by having me tip the person off. The other one I've thought about is that whoever was out there had been there before, more than once maybe, and the owner was afraid of them for reasons I don't know, and they were trying to warn me not to become a problem. I don't know which of those is right. I don't know if either of them is. What I keep coming back to is the back door handle. The way it moved that once and then stopped. I've spent more time than I should trying to figure out whether the person on the other side heard me moving around inside before they tried it, or whether they just felt the resistance of the latch and decided that was enough. Whether they decided it wasn't worth the trouble. Whether they had somewhere else they needed to be. My daughter texted me the next afternoon asking if I was okay. I told her yes. I said it was a mix-up with the rental. She had a rehearsal to get to. She didn't push on it. When I got home, I told my wife most of it. She looked up the listing, and it was already gone. The whole account, the profile, everything. Just not there anymore. That's about all I know about it.